I'm on a mission like a couple spies, and that, guys, is the reason why I catechize the good.
Welcome to the Reformed Standard. I'm Tony. Let's get started. Question 7 of the Westminster Larger Catechism reads, "What is God?" And the answer is, God is a spirit, in and of himself, infinite in being, glory, blessedness, and perfection, all-sufficient, eternal, unchangeable, incomprehensible, everywhere present, almighty, knowing all things, most wise, most holy, most just, most merciful and gracious, long-suffering, and abundant in goodness and truth. So this question is an absolute monster. So what the Catechism here is doing is it's laying out a theology proper of what it means to be God. Now, we can talk about, is this talking about the Father? Is this talking about sort of the divine nature? Is this talking about a particular person of the Godhead? And all of those are important questions to ask, and we'll probably talk about that when we come to this section in the confession itself. But for now, we'll talk about this as what is God is another way to say, what does it mean to be God? How do we describe a person who is God? What are the attributes that any person who can be considered God necessarily possesses? And we're not going to go through all of them here because, as I said, this is kind of a monster. But it sort of breaks it up into a couple different things. In and of himself, infinite in being, glory, blessedness, and perfection, all-sufficient, eternal, and unchangeable. We could kind of look at this and talk about it in terms of his absolute qualities or absolute attributes. And they're all variations on the same idea of aseity or of in himselfness. So he's infinite in being, meaning he has no restrictions. He's infinite in glory and blessedness and perfection. As we said, in question 1, God is sufficient in himself and has glory in himself. And it's not as though the creature that he creates, whether it's man or angels or the rest of the cosmos, those things don't add anything to him. He's infinite in blessedness and perfection, which means creation doesn't make him happier than he was. It doesn't increase his satisfaction. God is perfectly satisfied in and of himself in the fellowship of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. The next section, all sufficient also plays into that. Eternal and unchangeable. All of those play into the idea that God is not dependent on any external thing. He's eternal, meaning he's not constrained by time. There are no limits to his existence. He's unchangeable, meaning nothing from outside of God or nothing from inside of God could cause God to change. Next, we kind of move into a section that might be considered relative attributes or something in reference to another, to external things. And, there's complicated theology which explains how these attributes don't come into being, despite the fact that they are explained in relation to to creation. But, we're not going to go into all those details. That's not really the point of this podcast. So if you're interested in that, if you're interested in understanding, I would take a look at James Dolezal's new book, All That Is in God. And so he's incomprehensible, which doesn't mean we can't understand him, but it means we can't fully understand the totality of God. Everywhere present, almighty, knowing all things. Those are the classic omni attributes. Most wise, most holy, most just, most merciful and gracious. Those could be considered attributes that have to do with his governance and his providence over the world, right? He's wise. He's sovereign in a way that is effectual and makes sense. He's sovereign in a way that reflects his own goodness. He's most holy. He's most just. There's no moral compromise or ritual or impurity within him. Gracious and merciful is pretty self-explanatory. Long-suffering and abundant in goodness and truth. So I'm not going to go into any more detail than that, except to express that this question, rather than becoming some sort of dry stale list of attributes, which is, Karl Barth and some of the neo-Orthodox Reformed thinkers, I should say coming out of the Reformed tradition, they looked at this list of attributes and they took exception to the fact that we somehow thought we could define God. But instead of a dry list of attributes, we should look at these and we should be moved to praise, because we don't serve a God who is limited. We don't serve a God who's dependent on us. We don't serve a God who is constrained or who acts capriciously. But instead we serve a God who is most merciful and gracious, and he is abundant in goodness and truth.
Do you know, if you want, you could know this? The Catechism, hey, the Catechism, hey. Do you know what the chief and the man is? And how the Father, Son, and Spirit do manage? Do you know, if you want, you could know?
West Side.